Shepard Commander, it is recommended that we recruit Mike the Birdman Dodd for their superior geek knowledge. This would increase our chances of success against the old machines. The Gath consensus has infiltrated ThisWeekInGeek.net, and we find it adequate for our needs.
And now it's time for another special feature.
Hey guys, what's going on? You are listening to This Week in Geek, and I am still Mike the Birdman Dodd, and I still haven't seen the outside world since the middle of March. But you know what? That's okay, because I luckily have my lovely wife by my side and my ever-lovable housemate, Shannon. So that means I've got people to play board games with. And while there's your usual favorites like Scrabble, Monopoly, who the hell even plays Parcheesi? I couldn't even tell you what that game is about. So I'm looking for things to expand my quarantine feast of activities. And I haven't resorted to coloring books thus yet, though those are an option. I am looking at two of them right now. I decided to reach out to some of my friends on Reddit, and I met this person. I think I pronounced her name as Nadia, and she recommended me this game called Anomia, and she couldn't speak highly enough about it. And then I talked to my wife, Blair, which many of you know is a teacher, and she says, "Oh yeah, I've actually heard of this game." And I'm thinking, okay, you don't hang in board game circles. How do you know it? She's like, "Oh, it's a tool in some of my classrooms." I'm like, okay, fascinating. So I decided to reach out to the folks at Anomia Press, and thankfully they were able to get me a copy of the game, and they also set me up with an interview to speak with Andrew Ennis, and he is the CEO and inventor of Anomia, and we're going to speak with him today about, well, basically Anomia, but also how do you get started, what's it take to make a game, and basically just talking about nerd stuff in general. So without any further ado, let's welcome Andrew to the show.
Hello, how's it going, everyone?
It is going tremendously well. I got to say, you've definitely made quarantine a little bit more competitive for at least the last couple of days. So, Anomia. So, for those of my listeners that don't know what this game is, give us the Twitter pitch or the elevator pitch. What is Anomia?
Sure. So, well, I always like to first talk about the word anomia, which refers to a problem with word finding. So it refers to when something's sort of on the tip of your tongue, or you know what it is, but you just can't quite get to the actual word. And the game itself is very simple. It's essentially a party game. You need a deck of anomia cards, and you got a pile of draw a pile in the middle of the table, and players just go around one at a time drawing a card, and on the card there's a colored symbol and a category of some sort. The categories are typically things that everybody knows, like ice cream flavor, dog breed, politician, type of clothing. It could be pretty much anything. And if I draw a card and the symbol on my card matches the colored symbol on somebody else's card, that we have to quickly face off by giving examples of the things on each other's cards. So if your card says ice cream flavor and my card says dog breed, then I have to quickly yell out, chocolate, or, Cherry Garcia or whatever, before you can say, Labrador or German Shepherd. And while it sounds pretty simple, in the moment, your brain tends to freeze up, and you can't name a dog breed or an ice cream flavor, or some weird thing comes out of your mouth. That's not either of those things. So that's basically how you play.
Okay, so the game itself, relatively simple. It obviously relies on you able to process information quickly, being able to think faster than your opponent, and whether that will match up with your mouth, that's an entirely different question.
Right.
But obviously an idea like this doesn't just come to you fully formed out. So how did the development process for Anomia begin? Because for right now, game design, there's a lot of people entering the indie board game scene or indie games via Kickstarter, Indiegogo. How did this thing all start? because you've been around for a lot longer than I thought, actually.
Anomia's been out for about 10 years. So it actually started a long time ago. I actually had the idea for Anomia when I was about 12, and I'm 50 now. So you could do the math there. And the original idea came out of another game. So I used to play a game when I was a kid called Store, which you play with just a standard deck of playing cards. And that game was very similar to Anomia in that first of all, everybody would select a type of store to be. Like I could be a pet store, you could be a toy store, somebody else would be a candy store or whatever. And you have to remember everybody's stores. There's no like physical or visual cue as to what each person's store is. You just have to memorize it. And then you'd go around drawing regular playing cards. So like if I draw a jack and then the next player draws a 2 and you draw a 7 and the next player draws, a king, whatever. You keep drawing until 2 people have a match. Like I have a jack and you have a jack. And then when that happens, you face off by quickly naming something in their store before they name something in your store. And as a kid, I loved this game. It just got me all amped up, and I couldn't remember what your store was, and it just drove people insane, and it was very funny. But I always thought it could be better. You could develop it further. You could have more categories. You could do something else with it. So I literally thought about that for 25 years or something like that. You're like, oh, maybe one day I'll do that. So it wasn't until probably my late 30s that I actually prototyped that idea. And that happened in part because I had been working a lot in desktop publishing, and I had gained all these skills. Like back then I was using Quark Express, which was sort of a precursor to, what InDesign, which is what a lot of people use now. And one day I was like, oh, I actually have the skills now to prototype that idea I've had forever and ever. And so basically I did. I prototyped it. I made a really ugly, very simple version of what ultimately became Anomia. And then I started playing it with friends. And I play tested it probably for 4 years, just kind of on the side. I was still working full time, and I was, I got married, was having kids, and I'm also a musician, so I was doing a lot of performing, and so I had a pretty busy life, and this was just a little side project. I did that for I play tested it and refined it for maybe 4 or 5 years. I played it with a couple hundred people in that time, and just made refinements and tweaked it, and finally after 4 or 5 years it was done, and that was when I was like, okay, well, now what do I do? I think by then, at the end of that period, I think I had gone to Toy Fair, which is the giant US based industry trade show for the toy and game industry. And so I had started poking around, looking into businesses that maybe I could license the idea to. And ultimately I decided to self-publish it. So this was just before Kickstarter was a thing. I launched Anomia Press in June of 2009, and I think Kickstarter kind of came online in late April, early May of 2009. But I essentially did my own Kickstarter at that time. I had some web development experience, so I made a website and I spammed my music email list and all the people that had been playing the game with me over the years, and basically convinced people to pre-purchase copies of the game. And that subsidized my first print run. I made 2,500 copies, and I actually raised about $20,000 in about 6 weeks via this sort of homemade Kickstarter. And that's how it all began.
So since that time, obviously the game has gained a lot of popularity. I saw you were actually name dropped, and I think it was Julia Roberts name dropped you guys, didn't she?
Yeah, she did. Yeah, she. It was in the. I think that was back in 2017 or 2018. I got a text from a friend who was like at the dentist, and she was like, Julia Roberts just mentioned Anomia in People magazine. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, that's kind of amazing. Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, the amazing thing about it has been after that initial year of like having self-published it and getting it out and about, it really started to take on its own life. So it's always kind of amazing to me how like it just winds up in these funny places or gets these funny mentions like that. Where, you know, like Julia Roberts is playing my game. Like that's so amazing, you know, and not only that, but she mentioned is that, and it gets mentioned in like a giant magazine. So
now, one of the other things that I've also noticed that as you did mention, this game is popping up in all sorts of different places. One of the places that my wife mentioned it to me was this game is showing up in classrooms, and on your packaging it says this is from Mensa Select. So how did this get into the educational sector?
So, I mean, it's kind of, there's sort of two interesting threads there. I mean, just in terms of classrooms, you know, it's just a fun game that teachers enjoy because it, you know, there's like symbol recognition and reading and comprehension and, you know, and recall. So it sort of hits a few interesting things there that can be useful in the classroom. The other funny thing about that is that, you know, I was playing Anomia with my friends who were, you know, we were all in our, you know, 30s, maybe early 40s. But it was only after it was out for a little bit that I actually watched a bunch of 12-year-olds play it. And that was like a radically different thing. Like they just got so worked up. I mean, adults get really worked up, but you know how kids get really worked up. So I was like, oh my God, this is a really different thing when you put it in front of a bunch of kids. So it just like kids get really, especially, you know, now it's funny because kids are so oriented towards games on their phones and stuff, or on the, you know, on the PlayStation or whatever. Sometimes when you say, hey, let's play a tabletop game, they can be a little like resistant or just like roll their eyes or whatever. But usually what happens is when you actually get them playing, they get really into it and are kind of like, oh my God, this is actually really fun. So, you know, I mean, at its core, I think it's just a fun, fast-paced game. So that is appealing to kids who are, you know, into fun things that are fast-paced, you know. The other funny thing about it is that it, on the educational side, is that, so anomia, the term, the word is there's a modern day medical usage for that term, and it's specifically around problems with word finding, and that is something in the world of speech pathologists. So since the beginning, we've had this funny following with speech pathologists. And a couple of years ago, I live in Boston, and a couple of years ago, the big ASHA conference, the American Speech and Hearing Association conference, was in Boston. So I decided to exhibit there because, you know, whenever I do like cons like PAX or Gen Con, I always wind up talking to speech pathologists. They see the name, you know, like as they're walking down the aisle, and they're like, they come right over. They're like, what's this? You know, why is it called Anomia? What, you know, and or they already know the game because they're already using it in their therapeutic setting. So I exhibited there, and it was great. Like we sold a ton of games, and we connected with a lot of speech pathologists, other people who already knew the game, and a ton of people who didn't. And I think they use it, you know, both as it's intended as a game, but also, you know, you can use it kind of in an open-ended, like just as a series of prompts. So it's just kind of a fun tool in a more therapeutic setting. And actually was intending to exhibit at the American Occupational Therapy Conference this year, which unfortunately was in March in Boston, and it got canceled due to the whole COVID-19 shut down, so I wasn't able to do that this year, but I hope to. And so I love that, like, not only is Anomia a fun game, but there's this, it's fun in the classroom, and it's fun in a more therapeutic setting. And I've actually had some interesting. So one of the new products that I'm hoping to get out in the next year is actually a blank deck, because I've seen on social media people have been making their own decks, and also teachers have reached out to me about making decks for their classes. So I had a teacher who taught physiology reach out, and I sent her a blank deck because I have them around I use them for prototyping a lot. We're testing new content, and she made a deck for her physiology class, and all the cards were things like, thoracic cavity organ, or endocrine function and stuff like that. But she used it in her class. And then also my son takes Latin, and his teacher, turns out she's a fan of the game. He was wearing a t-shirt in school one day, so we're going to make a deck in Latin for that class. And there's lots of different ways that you can make a deck just around a very particular, like a very tight content set. Like you could make a history deck, you could make a deck to sort of challenge people about another language, like if you're learning a language, or about anything like in the sciences, or even literature, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of these ideas I'm playing with now to make little themed for standalone themed decks.
Well, it's actually funny that you mentioned language, because my wife, who is an educator herself, that's what she told me. Said these are showing up in French classrooms, because up here in Canada, French is our official second language. And it was just kind of cool just to know that this is a way for languages to be taught. And my wife's phone is going off, so speak of the devil. We're just gonna
no problem. I met a guy at I think it was PAX Unplugged, who teaches at a language school. I think they're in northern Minnesota, and he was curious about the game, and if there were other language versions of it, or versions of it in other languages, which there are. Actually, Anomia is in about 15 languages now. So I actually sent him. I get copies of the other language versions, and I don't really have much to do with them other than I love having them around, and sometimes I bring them to cons just because people get a kick out of seeing like the Chinese version or the Russian version or whatever. So I sent him a box of the French version, German, Danish, Swedish, Korean. I just sent him a bunch of different versions of it to play with at his school. So it's neat. And also, interestingly, I have the kids version is a slightly different take on the game. It's an image-based version of the game. So instead of having to give a category, like instead of having to name like ice cream flavor or whatever, the cards all have images on them. So like if your card has a turtle, or if your card has a witch on it, then what the ask there is that you have to quickly give a word that starts with the same sound as whatever the picture is, right? So if there's a turtle on the card, you could say terrific, or terrible, or Tallahassee. And if there's a witch, you could say water, or walking, or something like that, something with that "wa" sound. That game was also super popular with the speech pathologists. But it's fun because you can also play that game in any language at all, or you can even play in a group of mixed people who speak a variety of languages. So that's
I was about to say, I really could have seen this game being particularly useful, as you've mentioned speech pathologists a number of times. I growing up used to have a speech problem. You can kind of tell now every now and again. Sometimes I stutter, or as my engineer calls it, I malfunction. And just being able to think fast on the fly and being able to pronounce my words would have really helped. Plus, I think, as you mentioned, having other languages would be a tremendous help to learn words in that language. And it forces other parts of your brain to work at the same time. So this is a fantastically educational tool, yet also has that air of competition and fun. So I guess as we begin to wind things down here, what are some of the other things that are in development for Anomia right now?
So we have, there's already a few versions out. So there's two sort of general knowledge versions. There's the original game called Anomia, which is a small box with just 2 decks. And then there's the party edition, which is 6 more decks, and all of those decks are general knowledge decks. And then there's Anomia X, which is like the adult, After Dark version with sort of sex, drugs, alcohol references, plus just a lot of not necessarily racy stuff, just culturally adult stuff kind of mixed in. And then there's the kids version, which like I was saying is all picture based. And now I'm starting to work on sort of more thematic expansion. So I've got a pop culture version, which is all about just categories drawn from, TV, movies, internet, music, and other stuff. So that will be a 3-deck box. And that will, I was hoping to have it out for the holidays. Though right now things are a little wonky with production, and it's not clear to me, what's going to be happening this year. So, that's my hope. We'll see what happens. And then, after that, I have, I think I was saying, a blank deck. I want to get those out. And then I have 5 themed in like single deck versions. That would be, I have a food deck, a people deck. So just all about different types of people, food, people, places, animals, and sports. So those are sort of 5 standalone just decks. And then I have other, as I've been making the pop culture deck, I'm like, I should definitely make like a sci-fi or a geek deck. There's a sort of question of like a music deck, which I haven't been able to fully wrap my head around because it's such a big, unruly, wonderful thing of, how do you whittle that music down just to, a couple of decks, because you could just make, you could make just a pop music deck, or you could make, you could dive down deep in any of those areas. And then I've also got a lot of interest from like church groups for like, a Bible deck, or like from the Orthodox Jewish community for a deck kind of built around that culture and that, sort of the Bible and things like that. People have made decks, around like their weddings or, so, and then interestingly, like just going back to the blank deck for a second, there's, like we have a family place that we go to up in Maine, and I sort of told all my cousins about, like, I'm making a couple of decks just based on that. So really it would be just for that family based on our experiences up in Maine. So like you can actually do some really fun, very personal stuff, or like you can make a deck about your school. Like if you're a kid in high school, like, because there's all these little, sort of neat little idiosyncrasies to your school that only people at your school are going to know the answers to. So you can make these great little standalone versions that would be like hyper local, or you could make decks about like New York City, or somebody made a deck about the city of Atlanta because they live there and they enjoy the game. So I saw that on Twitter one day.
I'd say just while you were talking there, I could see these being adapted, especially because I could see this game being particularly popular among the college crowd. this would be a really fun way for people to get to know each other during like Frosh Week and stuff like that. So
yeah, I mean, and there you may want to use just the general knowledge X because you haven't built up the knowledge set yet of the college, but you could put it in like dorm or etc. I just went on the are you familiar with the Joko cruise?
Yes, actually.
So I was on that. It was like the last cruise ship out there, and I was on that in March, from March 7th to March 14th as a sponsor, and I ran a bunch of Anomia events on the boat. And I made there's a very, very active Facebook community around that cruise. And for those of you who don't know it, it's like it's kind of an amazing thing. It's like a super geeky cruise where it's like they have an 800 board game library run by Jen Ellis over at Together Studios. So there's this giant, they basically take over one of the dining rooms, and you can go sign out games anytime, and people are playing board games like constantly. And then they have tons of like live music and comedy. And then there's tons of activities actually run by attendees. So like if you know a lot about, like somebody taught a lock picking class, somebody taught a class about everything from like lock picking to knitting to yoga and meditation and you name it. Anyway, so I reached out to the Facebook community and was like, I want to make an Anomia deck about Joko, like give me some ideas. And so I kind of went back and forth with a few people, and a bunch of people chimed in on the thread. And so I wound up making 2 decks like about the cruise and sort of about popular culture as related to what I thought people were into. So lots of Harry Potter references, lots of Star Wars and Star Trek references, and then lots of references to the boat, and to the actual cruise experience. And that was very popular.
Well, I got to say, I think the future is looking bright for Anomia, especially with all these potential spin-offs and applications for it. Andrew, I got to say, thank you for taking time out of what I'm sure is still relatively busy time, because you are getting ready to launch some new things, though we don't know when because of this pandemic we currently find ourselves in. Yeah. So if people want to find Anomia, where is the best place for them to go?
You can always go to our website, which is anomiapress.com. And Anomia is spelled Anomia, anomiapress.com. And then it's pretty widely available in the US and Canada at, you can certainly get it on Amazon. You can get it at Barnes & Noble. In Canada, you can get it at Chapters, Indigo. It's available in many, many mom and pop, local toy stores. And though I know a lot of those stores are closed right now, but a lot of those stores are actually doing online ordering. So you can still reach out to those stores and order through them. It's great to support your local toy store if you can, because they are the heart of the toy and game industry, in my opinion. So, yeah.
Absolutely. That is something I 100% stand behind. Anyway, guys, please check out anomiapress.com. Please pick this game up, especially if you're a parent and you want to do something a little bit different with your kids. This is a competitive game, which can be a lot of fun. If you are stuck in quarantine with your roommates, your partner, or whoever else, just get this game. It's fun. My wife kicked my ass at it, so damn you to hell. Anyway, coming up next time on the show, I'm not quite sure, because as we continue through quarantine week 97, I'm pretty sure we'll be doing more interviews. I know me and Alex should be doing a roundtable of Final Fantasy VII Remake as we do more prototypes, because we had a lot more time to play video games now. And we will, and we should be having our Persona 5 Royal Roundtable with special interview guest Kyle Hebert coming up, and another guest who will be joining us to talk about the metaverse and the metanav, such as it may be. So anyway, guys, as always, keep it locked to ThisWeekInGeek.net. I've been Mike the Birdman Dodd saying, live free or die hard. And as my friend Jackie Bam Bam might say, be cool, be kind, be careful. We'll catch you next time right here on ThisWeekInGeek.net.
Well, That's our show.
All right, here's the deal. Every time you watch my show, I will send you $40.
Checks will not be honored.
You've been listening to This Week in Geek, your source for guaranteed nonsense or your money back. Tune in next week for more info on the most important things you didn't need to know. Check out our website at ThisWeekInGeek.net and subscribe to our podcast through iTunes or any podcatcher. If you'd like to comment on this episode, head over to this episode's post at ThisWeekInGeek.net and leave a comment through Facebook Connect. Follow us on Twitter at ThisWeekInGeek.net and follow our Instagram at twig_official_podcast. Social media not your thing? Send us an email at feedback@ThisWeekInGeek.net. We'll see you next time, and remember,
lower your shields and surrender your listenership.
Just when you think this show is terrible, something wonderful happens.
What?
It ends.
I have to go. Somewhere there is a crime happening.